By the time of Ethelred the Unready, whose name was a joke because his name meant the good advice and unready meant bad advice, could also explain the fact that of his unsuccessfulness as a king, that he had bad advisors. He was a well-read man. That the English were literate and had a tax system that could produce a surplus each year was one of the reasons why the Vikings attacked. The Vikings had no system of taxation, and in the early period, at the time of the Battle of Morden, there were small raiding parties, as described in the poem in my other video. But the fact is that the Vikings became more organised. They became more organised on a national basis between the Norwegians and the Danes. As the English had invaded Britain under Hengist's time, and after the fight at Finnsburg, they then went into the service of Vortigern, fought the Picts, fought the Scots. Then Vortigern turned on them, and then Hengist turned on Vortigern. They established over the Welsh an apartheid and a genocide and slavery. But over time, during Alfred the Great's time, when the Danes were pushed back, and at this time the Vikings were much more mixed between the Norwegian and the Danes, but the great army that Alfred was fighting against, the English had absorbed the Celtic population, and the distinction between Celt and Saxon was breaking down to be a unified English identity under Alfred, and the tool that was used to do this was Christianity. Now, whether you agree with it or not, that was a fact of the point, that English became synonymous with Christianity, mixed in with the old Nordic gods as well. So it was a polytheism of Christianity rather than the modern Christianity which we have today. And this was a stark contrast to the Vikings, who kept the old gods in mind. The famous sagas speak of as the English had Woden as god, the Vikings had Odin as god, the same character of mythology. But there were strong differences in the culture between the English and the Danes. And as the English had imposed on the Welsh, the Danes imposed on the English. The English, in a sense, were getting a taste of their own medicine at this time. And it became so strong, the Danish influence in Britain, that there was an area along the east coast called the Danelaw. Now, successive kings after Alfred the Great said that there was a legal aspect to the Danelaw, so that's why it was given the name. The Danish laws and the Danish way of life will be preserved in those areas. Athelstan later reunited the entire country. Athelstan the Great was Alfred the Great's son. But after this, we enter a period of brief stability. But the Danes are still a menace, and the Norwegians would later become a greater menace, as I will explain soon. The Danes invaded under Sven, made a direct attack on London, and then you can see their mobility by the fact that once they were given £16,000, which is probably the equivalent of about £16 billion in today's money, they then quickly went round and attacked Cornwall and Wales, and the English had to send relief to Wales. So you can see how different it was from Hengist's time. In 449. Well, now I'm talking about the period of the 950s to 1000 AD era, and then later on I would speak about the Norman era. Well, during this time, the Norwegians established themselves in a kingdom called Normandy in the north of France. The Danes later reinforced that with the Norwegians, seeking control for themselves. But that later fitted in with the baronial system of France, and so the French recognised the power of the Danes and the Normans as they became known, but they did not recognise their sovereignty, their legal sovereignty. So they became dukes, and they would later become Duke William the Bastard, the leader of the Normans, later on in history. The problem came for the English. The biggest problem that came for the English was in King Edgar's time, because Edward, the previous king to Edgar, was murdered by his own men because of the unrelenting pressure of Sven, the Danish kings. It made the English turn on their own leaders, and Edgar came in to replace Edward, who was slain and murdered, and thus he was then put as in a weak position against the new Danish leader, Canute, who came over with an even greater army. He unified England, Denmark and Norway. That was why they called him Canute the Great. He even made a point of sitting in the sea and pretending to hold back the sea, just to show that he was not all powerful and only God could hold back the sea. That was the point of that exercise. I have 4 minutes to explain the Norman Wars. Well, during this time, Harald Hardrada, the king of the Norwegians, around 1050, was in the employ of the Byzantine Empire. He was a very experienced commander and did many operations for them, including the retaking of Constantinople after a revolt. He, after seeing that Edward the Confessor, who was a weak king, died, and Sven Harold Godwinson, who was King Harold Godwinson's father, put his son in position to become part of the royal family of England. Now, Harold Godwinson, the Godwinson family, had come from the Anglo-Danish roots, so you can see that Anglo-Saxon England really ended with Canute. But Anglo-Danish England Canute set out charters of laws for the behaviour of Englishmen and Danes, whereas the Normans didn't do that when they invaded. They just simply conquered and subjected the entire country, so they were actually worse than the Anglo-Saxons. But Harold went to Normandy at first as an ally to William, but was threatened with torture. Under those circumstances, he had to swear an oath to William, but William betrayed him. As Harold went back to England and became king, he was attacked by Harald Hardrada of Norway in the north, and a mighty army of Englishmen he sent came upon the Norwegians at Stamford Bridge, where he was outnumbered 3-1, as the English only had 7,000 housecarls who were their best troops, slaughtered the Norwegians there, and then had to march 200 miles south to fight the Normans. The Normans were at first pushed back. William the Bastard was rumoured to have been killed, but he then raised his helmet in the midst of battle, and the Normans could see that he was alive and well. But at this time, the English western flank was pushing the Normans back, but their eastern flank was still on the hill. At this point, an arrow pierced King Harold Godwinson, who would have been one of the greatest kings in English histories if he had been allowed by fate to rule longer. Pierced his eye, killed him, and then the Normans hacked his body to pieces as they killed his bodyguard. That was the end of Anglo-Saxon England. What came after was centuries and centuries of resistance against the Norman caste system, which we're still fighting to this day. I will do another video on Norman England.